And then still have to be a badass. It's fantastic. I am pleased that women are getting to stand up and be counted and be strong and strong and feminine. You know, we don't have to look like men to be strong, and you know, it's all going according to plan.
Now listen, Kyle, whatever you do, don't stare at him.
I'm staring at him. Is that a man?
Actually, it's 7 men. Parts of them anyway.
Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to a critique of Terminator Dark Fate. I just want to say thank you for all the support in the first episode. It's very much appreciated. If you're new here, I would recommend watching the first video in this series for context, but with that being said, let's continue with the critique. So when we last left off, we watched John Connor's unceremonious death at the hands of a new Arnie bot, and Sarah left to grieve the loss of her son. The Arnie bot simply walked off towards the ocean, and we get a substantial time skip of 22 years. For those paying attention, that puts us in modern day 2019. The next scene puts us at a bridge in Mexico City at night, where a couple are making out, and behind them we see the infamous electricity and bubble appear, indicating someone is traveling through time. It is here that we are introduced to Grace, and what an entrance she makes, by falling from a bridge. She hits some of the metal support beams and lands face first onto the ground. You know, I find it very funny that these time travel teleports land in some of the most awkward places, and I also find it funny that this movie is already mooching off previous installments. This may seem minor to some, and in all fairness, it is, compared to the rest of the movie. With that said, it's still an observation that I couldn't help noticing. In the first film, we get the T-800's teleportation spot at Griffith Observatory on the ground. As for Kyle, he literally falls from the sky in an alleyway. Now, we have Grace in a similar situation here. The difference is, her fall should have killed her because no ordinary human could survive that hit and fall. Lucky for her though, she's not an ordinary human. As the couple takes her to their car, the pesky 5-0 shows up, and we get introduced to her... abilities. What follows is a janky quick fight scene, and she takes down the cops with swift ease. She then sizes up the man, takes his clothes, and steals their car. Okay, let's break this down a bit. First off, why would she take this dude's clothes? Why would she not take the clothes of one of the unconscious and or probably dead cops she just took down a few seconds ago? I guess it was meant to serve as yet another reference to a common Terminator trope. Again, minor complaint, it just seems like an odd choice. Second, her abilities are something new that we haven't seen thus far. She's able to calculate and see enemy movements and what direction they are going to do next. Think the Uchiha clan's Sharingan, minus the cool eyes and sound effects. The question is, what kind of Terminator is she? Well, she's not a Terminator. She's different. We'll get more into what she is later, but let's just say this opening isn't really off to a great start. The first fight scene looked and felt clanky, and her speed ability looked a little cartoony, even by Terminator standards. Her movements looked more like something the Flash would do. Terminator or not, this was a weird moment I can't get over. As we continue, we get introduced to who will become our John Connor replacement.
What?
This is Dani Ramos. Dani is an ordinary girl living her life like anyone else. The scenes we get of her remind me of Sarah's opening scenes in T1. It's a simple set of establishing shots to introduce us to her character. We see her brother and father, and she seems to have taken up the role of mother of the house. I find it interesting how they seem to be setting up her as a sort of Sarah Connor archetype. Of course, we know this goes nowhere as we get a classic bait and switch revealed later. As Dani and her brother leave for work, another time traveler makes his way in. And guess what? This is the second individual to make a crash landing via time travel. Quick side note, why are these guys falling from the sky? Like, I get time travel is unpredictable and you could land almost anywhere. With that said, the writers are in full control of where people end up after time traveling. It just seems like a weird choice to have both featured characters fall to the ground when they enter the past. The first two films showed it simple enough. In fact, it was a good indicator for who was who in a way. If you compare the T-800 first appearance to Kyle's, you see a stark contrast. One seems completely unaffected by the time travel, while the other is shown to be in pain. It's a nice touch and hint as to identify who's human and who's a Terminator. Dark Fate tries to use that mindset again, but it's about as successful and subtle as the Kool-Aid Man busting through the wall.
Oh yeah!
Although, I'd say I got a good chuckle out of seeing the Terminator descend because he lands on his knees, unaffected by falling. Again, weird choice, but it is what it is. Also, did this Terminator really just drop in the exact area where its target lives? Talk about some serious luck. I mean, really, imagine how fast the story would have ended if Dani was standing right below where the Terminator was teleporting from.
Michael, did you hear the good news? We're getting a new nanny. Oh, Jane, I'm ever so excited. Do you suppose she'll be everything we've dreamed? Oh, I do hope so. I've always imagined the most beautiful...
Ah! 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 Damn it! Ah! 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 Ah!
Now, obviously this wouldn't have happened, it just seems like yet another odd choice for the filmmakers to make. I feel like I'm going to be saying this a lot in this series. Regardless, he drops down and a woman witnesses this. He approaches her, says buenos dias, touches the shirt she's holding, and it suddenly materializes on him. Wait, what? Okay. So, there's a few things to say about this. First, let's go back to the first shape-shifting Terminator, the T-1000. When we're introduced to this new Terminator, we see the usual take out the guy with clothes, then take his clothes. The next we see him, he's impersonating the police officer. When he gets shot, we see the clothes are not damaged per se, as it appears the T-1000 is able to mimic clothes as well. The thing is, though, it's never shown to us. The only line of dialogue we get is the T-800 explaining the T-1000's ability to copy via physical contact. We can assume this is what it did when it took out the cop, so as weird as it is to see it, this most likely isn't the first time a Terminator has mimicked clothing. Now let's talk about Gabriel Luna and his performance, at least in this scene. I have to say, I liked how he interacts as an infiltrator. His first contact with a person felt and looked normal, all things considered. It's similar to how the T-1000 acted. When he acts human, he's nice, calm, and charming. But here's my issue. That's pretty much all he does. The filmmakers felt it so necessary to copy T2 that they didn't figure out what made the T-1000 such a formidable threat, and they clearly didn't pass this idea on to Gabriel. When the Rev 9 is in kill mode, it doesn't look as focused and serious, at least compared to previous Terminators. Look how the T-1000 switches from the friendly neighborhood cop to a near unstoppable killing machine. Robert Patrick was able to convey two very different sides of the same character. He was able to make a new Terminator scary in his own way. Where Arnold had the intimidation factor because of his size and build, Robert had the subtle head tilts, the stiff stature when he was running, and the overall creep factor. The truth of the matter is that the T-1000 was the final evolution of Terminators. I mean, the TX and T3 was literally a combo of an endoskeleton and liquid metal skin for shapeshifting. But was that even really necessary? I mean, sure, the TX was able to hack other machines, but that said, the T-1000 is still the superior machine because it can get in almost anywhere. It can shapeshift without the need of an endoskeleton, and its infiltration capabilities rival the T-800's, at least in the sense of communication and conveying emotion. The Rev 9's only unique abilities consist of separating its liquid metal exterior from its endoskeleton. Okay, why? Why is it that the filmmakers can't stop going back to the same formula with Terminators? With the exception of Salvation, every Terminator sequel features a shape-shifting Terminator. The TX, the T-3000, and now the Rev 9. It's the Jurassic World problem. Just because you go bigger doesn't mean it's better.
The park needs a new attraction every few years in order to reinvigorate the public's interest, kind of like the space program. Corporate felt genetic modification would up the wow factor.
They're dinosaurs, wow enough.
Retreading old ground for the third time didn't pay off. As I stated earlier, Dark Fate is just another T2 clone, except it goes a step further and completely reboots the lore. For now, the Rev 9 proceeds to knock on Dani's door, and her father answers. It asks for Daniela, and that he's a friend. Her father corrects the Rev 9, saying that her friends call her Dani, and it smiles and reaffirms this new information. Now, I actually do like this to an extent, because it has a small payoff a little later, though it is short-lived, unfortunately. Next, we see Dani and her brother at work. They work at a car manufacturing company, and they see automated machines doing their job. They ask their supervisor what's going on, and he responds, "The future," implying that machines will take over. It's a nice enough reference about the entire series and how it seems Judgment Day is destined and Skynet's takeover is inevitable. We then see Grace and Dani's father converging onto the factory, and we know exactly what's going to happen here. We know that Dani's father isn't actually there and that the Rev 9 is imitating him. Then, as the Rev 9 closes in on Dani, Grace will come in, temporarily stopping it, and tell her to come with me if you want to live. And of course, that's what happens. But, oh, wait, this time it's not come with me if you want to live.
You come with me or you're dead in the next 30 seconds.
See? Look, it's different. They're not doing the same thing again. Okay, stop. Just stop. Whether it's come with me if you want to live, or come with me or you're dead in the next 30 seconds, it's the same member berries BS of this franchise like many others can't stop doing. The first time the Terminator franchise did it was a little bit more acceptable and had more depth and impact than one might think. Remember back to the first Terminator film, where Kyle saves Sarah at Tech Noir. The first thing he tells her,
Come with me if you want to live.
and the bond that develops between them solidifies the importance and meaning of that line. Kyle Reese went back in time for Sarah because he loves her, and will die to protect her. Now go to T2 where Sarah comes in contact with the face that has brought her so many nightmares. She's in shock and panic. Then it looks down to her, extending its hand, and says,
Come with me if you want to live.
And though she doesn't trust it right away, the bond that develops between Sarah and Uncle Bob is epitomized with the very same statement that her late lover told her.
Come with me if you want to live.
And as the movie continued, the Terminator's loyalty to the protection of John Connor became much more clear. The scene in the desert with Sarah monologuing is a fantastic example of how that "come with me if you want to live" line had such an impact. And by the end of the film, the Terminator concluding that sacrificing itself will save humanity from Skynet is that much more emotional, especially to Sarah because of that famous line being spoken, as well as all the events that occurred leading up to it. There was a lot more depth in that film that I think some realize. It's one of the few times that a member berry was used properly. Now, compare all this to Dark Fate's line delivery in context, and it's quite literally being used as a cheeky reference with no soul or impact behind it. And I know what you're going to say, but Spooky Clutter, the line does mean something because of the bond Dani and Grace will share in the future. Right. We'll get to that bond later on.
Hey everyone, my name is Jason, and this is Backtrack Cinema. This is a channel where you go find movies from the past that you know and love. My channel basically is, guys, that I talk movies from old, mostly 70s, 80s. I hit the 90s, a lot of decades, really. I never have time to go see modern movies all the time or go to the theater every week, so my channel's more focused on older films. And I thank Caleb. Caleb's a good friend. He's asked me to do like a little review of Dark Fate, my thoughts on it, and all that. Terminator Dark Fate, as he's putting this, I don't exactly what video, he's putting this big review thing together. I'm a huge Terminator fan. If you've followed my channel for any length of time so far, I've mentioned that, you know, it's one of my favorite movies of all time, the original, and I love T2. But the thing with this franchise, it never found its footing after that. There's some good ideas, there's some good concepts in each movie. The biggest mistake that it seems to what happens is John Connor and Sarah Connor are kind of like a yin and a yang, the mother and the son. You know, they're so important to each other. A Terminator movie doesn't seem to work without them both in it. You get T3, they kill Sarah Connor off, and there's a lot of problems with that movie, but it doesn't seem to work. It doesn't seem that when she's not there, they fill it with Kate Brewster, and I do think she's the best part of that film. But, you know, without her there, but that movie, you know, John Connor was completely characterized wrong. You get the Terminator Salvation, you know, I think it's the most underrated Terminator film. Again, though, Sarah's gone. And who's to say Sarah couldn't be alive in that future? You know what I mean? They could have had her in there. I don't see why not. And again, it's something was just kind of missing. Something's forgettable. You turn to Genesis, that's just a big fan fiction. That's like the most expensive fan film ever made, essentially. And what they do with Sarah, what they do with John Connor is just, it's not good. It's not good at all, man. And then with Dark Fate, they do the unthinkable. They kill John Connor to tell their story. I don't hate Dark Fate. There's a lot of problems with it, though, but I don't hate it. I even watched it yet. It's gone down in my rating a bit, but it's still... I have a good time with it, I guess, as an action film. I love Sarah Connor in it, though. I think that's what really draws me to the film, is Yeah, what would happen if they did get John? What would Sarah's purpose would be? What would happen to her? And make no mistake about it, her not being able to protect John, that would have killed her. I honestly think that would have killed her. I don't think she would have survived all those years. She either would have drank herself to death, or something far worse. She would never be able to live with herself again. And the movie explores, you know, giving her purpose. The movie explores what happens when a Terminator has fulfilled its mission. It can't go back to where it was from. It's in this alternate timeline. So they try to tell the story by giving him purpose, by him learning and all that. It's the execution of his little storyline that's not great. I can watch this for Sarah Connor, Linda Hamilton's performance. I think a lot of this movie is just, you know, T2 all over again. Now, is that from the director's love for T2 maybe? Maybe he just wanted to make his own version of T2. The only reason to kill John Connor was to introduce us to new characters. And that is something I absolutely hate. I hate when they did that in Alien 3. I hate when they did that in the Nightmare on Elm Street, The Dream Master. But for some reason, when I first watched this, this didn't bother me. And I think it's because we've been so unattached from John Connor to this point. I mean, we haven't seen Edward Furlong John Connor since 1991. And he's been screwed over so many times. John Connor has been handled by different filmmakers and been characterized so differently that, do we even know who John Connor is anymore? Other than that, that's why I look at Terminator as T1 and T2. Dark Fate to me is almost like a fan film. Again, this is a really expensive one. They didn't justify anything. Like, when they first killed John Connor in the movie, I'm like, okay, now what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with this? And I just don't think they did enough with it. They just retreaded T2 with new characters. Now, I do think Grace is a badass in it. I do like her character. I like that she's augmented. I think that's a cool idea and stuff like that. Like, a lot of these movies, they have cool ideas in them, but it's really the execution. I think there's a lot of distracting CGI in this movie. It's not gritty and visceral and like it was in the first movie. It didn't have that approach. I feel like a lot of modern action movies all feel the same, with the exception of a few. Like, I mean, John Wick stands on its own because it just feels so different and it's shot so different. But I don't know, this film works for me in some ways. Other ways, it does. Story-wise, the film don't work. I mean, they keep trying to take us to T2 all the time. T1 and T2. They keep trying to say, send back someone in the past to protect our future kind of thing, storyline. And I feel like it's just like, we've already retreaded this so many times. We don't want to see this anymore. And even the very first Terminator film, he never meant to make a T2. That was the whole point of Terminator 1. The final battle would be fought in our past. The final battle will be fought in our past. But what James Cameron did with T2 was that he introduced some things in it by making Arnold, the Terminator, a good guy and fleshing out this more like what it means to be human and teaching a machine our humanity and all sorts of good stuff in that film. You see Sarah Connor becoming more like a machine with her arc and, you know, her coming back to her humanity a bit. So they just did something a lot more with the characters. There was none of that in here in Dark Fate. Dark Fate fails on many levels. I don't think it's the worst movie in the franchise, by far. And, you know, if Linda Hamilton wasn't in this movie, I mean, this movie's hated as it is. Without her in it, it would probably be terrible. Honestly, it'd probably be terrible. I didn't like the Rev 9. The Rev 9 was just a T-1000, but it could separate itself. It's like they keep trying to advance these machines over and over and over. But yet the first Terminator is the scariest Terminator. And that was the idea of the thing. That it was, I mean, you don't get more. That was the idea of the thing. It was scary because it could infiltrate and look human. That was what's so scary. And James Cameron made this real scary thought in our head of technology, AI. Like, that's scary. What if artificial intelligence could start thinking for itself? You didn't get the fear in this movie. You didn't get any of that. It's been, you know, you don't get more advanced than a T-1000. Let's be honest. There's just a lot of rehashing and retreading. And what's the most frustrating thing about a Terminator fan, and I think I could speak for a lot of Terminator fans, is there's so much untapped potential. Caleb asked me to do this video because he knows I'm a big Terminator fan. Me and Caleb have had private discussions, and within 15 minutes of us talking, we've already come up with half a dozen ideas you could do with Terminator that haven't been explored. And that's just two fans talking. He says, you got Hollywood, you gotta stop. Stop playing into those patterns. I get it. It's a business. They gotta make money. They gotta go with the trends. This is what makes money. This movie didn't make money. This movie freaking bombed for a reason. I mean, there's ways you gotta treat legacy characters, man, and do it and honor it and justify it. They didn't do that here at all. So, like I said, I like Grace. I like the action in the film. I love Sarah Connor in the film. I love her performance. But you take all that away, there's nothing here. It's a frustrating film too. It can be frustrating because everyone was excited. They're bringing Terminator back. Maybe this is the start of a new trilogy. Like Salvation was supposed to be the start of a new trilogy, which I think they should have stuck with, because I thought that was actually a pretty decent movie. And then they just, it's such a, other than it's one of the greatest franchises. It just needs to start being more inventive. Take us to the future. What are John Connor's stories? Was he just this natural leader, or did he have to really work, earning people's trust and all this stuff? The relationship between Kyle and John, explore that. You know what I mean? How did Reese fall in love with his mom so fast? When he gives him the picture, planting that seed, explore that. You know what I mean? Explore the fear that would go through the resistance with the Terminator. What if when the brand new T-800 come out, how much fear that would have invoked in the resistance, and how paranoia could have really set in. You could just imagine when the T-800 was that new prototype, how that would have changed the game. Explore those ideas in the future. Remember what Reese said, it wasn't until the infiltrators arrived. The T-800s, they were the worst. There's real fear there in that first movie. There's a real visceral rawness to that first movie, and that's why it's a horror film. You know what I mean? But honestly, guys, I can rant and rave about Terminator all day, but those are just my thoughts a little bit on the franchise, on Dark Fate. Yeah, it can be an entertaining, good time, but the story really pulled it down in a lot of the decisions they made. I'm sure Caleb's going to go into detail because he has a lot of good points of things that don't make sense in that movie. So definitely listen to this. If this video is part of his video, I don't know how he's cutting it all together, but I love Terminator, guys. I love sitting here talking to you guys about Dark Fate. It's a lot of fun. I just watched it the other day. So come to my channel if you like older movies, you like talking about this kind of stuff, and subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out anything. And check out the Dark Ether Files podcast. Check out Caleb's stuff. He does great stuff over there. It's a completely different experience what you get there. So just do it, man. Do it. Soak in all the content. And you know what? Hopefully we will get a whole new Terminator or a sequel or a trilogy set in the future war one day. But until then, there's no fate but what we make. My name is Jason. You're watching Backtrack Cinema. I will see you on the next video. Cheers.
So after the Rev 9 finds Dani's brother, it asks him where she is. We then see Dani walking towards them, and the Rev 9 reveals a gun from a paper bag, which was actually its liquid metal skin? Okay then. As the Rev 9 points the gun at Dani, ready to waste her, Grace comes in as expected and temporarily knocks down the Rev 9. And for some reason, Dani is freaking out about her dad. Are you kidding me? The thing just pointed a gun straight at you and you're worried about it? Like, seriously, dad or not, he just pointed a damn gun at you. On top of that, look at his face. That's clearly not your father, so why are you wanting to go check on it? Ugh, we're only 16 minutes in and this movie already has a bunch of inconsistent creative decisions. Almost every time I've watched this movie, this is usually the part where I lost so much interest. For one thing, the fact that this film is set in present day instead of taking us into the future war that's been teased to us so many times is frustrating as a Terminator fan. And we haven't even reached the point where this movie takes a nosedive with the lore. Regardless, with Dani, her brother, and Grace on the run, the Rev 9 is getting back up and it leads us into the car chase, yet another Terminator trope. You see, even though this franchise is about killer cyborgs from the future time traveling to kill their enemy, there was a sense of grounded realism to a certain degree. The action set pieces early on didn't have a lot of CGI to take me out of the action. Dark Fate is completely different. Most of the chases and action sequences are CGI-infested messes with so many over-the-top moments that were genuinely distracting to me. Remember the car chase in T3? That was high-octane levels of insane, and Dark Fate decided to copy that too. But before we get to that car chase, Grace gives us a small exposition dump about this new Terminator, where it came from, and what she is. She says she's human, but augmented. There's more to this that will be explained later in the film, but right off the bat, I'm questioning why the Resistance did not send a reprogrammed Terminator instead. Considering what we do find out about Grace, this is a huge problem from the strategic viewpoint of an assumed struggling Resistance fighting against a technologically superior enemy. For now, the car chase ensues and we see more of Grace and her abilities. The Rev 9 separates its liquid metal exterior from its endoskeleton, and we see that it's able to act on its own. While this is different from the TX, it still feels excessive and unnecessary. To elaborate on the T-1000 a bit, it was the ultimate evolution of Terminators. We've seen T-1s, T-600s, T-800s, and the T-1000 can be considered the culmination of the ultimate killing machine. Its weaknesses were very situational if you think about it. You either needed an extreme cold substance like, say, liquid nitrogen, or be near a place of extreme heat capable of melting metal. If you had no access to any of these things, you're SOL. This being the case, why would Skynet ever go back to endoskeletons when the creation of liquid metal Terminators made them obsolete? This is why Skynet sent the T-1000 in the first place. It was a superior model to the T-800, and it had the capability to defeat one in battle. Hopefully you're beginning to understand why I'm so critical of these creative choices. From a logical standpoint, it makes no sense. So as we get towards the end of the chase, Dani's brother dies, leaving Grace and Dani cornered by the Rev 9 split in two. Then, all of a sudden, a mysterious yet familiar figure appears, in what I can only describe as the most boring, emotionless intro I've seen in recent years for a legacy character. Sarah Connor, Mother of the Future, has returned to the war, and the expression on her face couldn't have been more bored. I mean, Jesus Christ, listen to how she delivers the iconic line.
I'll be back.
So Sarah incapacitates the Rev 9, delivers the boring "I'll be back" bit, and Grace with Dani steal her car. I find her reaction odd and amusing. She gets pissed they stole her car, but what exactly were you expecting them to do? These two women are complete strangers. They don't know who you are. They're just trying to stay alive, and you just show up, say you'll be back, and walk off. At this point, here would have been the appropriate moment to deliver the "come with me if you want to live" line. It would get these characters together and we would get more expositional dialogue about what exactly is going on. But nah, they just piss off, leaving Sarah behind. Great stuff, ladies. Okay, now let's get into the juicy bits about our protector, Grace, here. As they're driving, Grace starts to crash, as she puts it. She explains that her metabolism was tuned for short, intense bursts. She goes on saying that you either take down a Terminator in the first few minutes or you're dead. Then Grace says she needs meds, I guess to recharge her proverbial batteries. Alright, I feel like I don't need to explain why the concept of this character and the retarded in-universe choice that is made to send her back is a stupid and flawed idea, but for the sake of those that don't understand why, let's discuss it. In the past, protectors that were sent back didn't have this kind of crippling flaw that would make anyone with half a brain understand it's not a good idea to send someone like this into a combat scenario where you knew there was a high probability that they couldn't take down a Terminator in a few minutes. The previous protectors consisted of a human soldier and a reprogrammed T-800. Now, while both were outclassed by their opponents, which did add to the tension of the story a bit, they weren't dependent on specific items in order to function. Why the Resistance decided to send such a flawed and unreliable tool to go back in time for a potentially long and drawn-out mission is beyond any kind of proper strategic plans. Now sure, Kyle Reese being an ordinary human is no match for a T-800 in physical combat. With that said, he was an experienced soldier in the Resistance. What he lacked in physical prowess, he had in combat experience against Terminators. Augmented humans just sounds lazy and unreliable as a viable protector. It might make sense in constant combat scenarios on the battlefield, but at that point, they're just expendable assets that are as disposable as a common firearm. Useful in the heat of the moment, but when it runs out of ammo, it's useless. And that should not be the kind of protector that a Resistance would send back. It should have been an experienced Resistance soldier or a reprogrammed Terminator. The filmmakers tried to do something different, and I use different very sparingly, but ended up making a more inefficient version of a Terminator. Moving along, Dani and Grace go to a pharmacy where Grace searches for meds and then passes out. While the scene was playing, I couldn't help but think of Grace as a drug addict looking for her fix. Dani drags Grace outside where Sarah's waiting for them. They drive to a motel, and while on the way, Sarah asks for Dani's phone and throws it out the window. Dani, being understandably upset, asks why she chucked it out, and Sarah responds with, "Might as well be wearing a tracking bracelet." Now, while she isn't wrong about this, I question why she threw it out the window because when they get to Sarah's motel room, Sarah has her phone in a chip bag. This is in order to disrupt the GPS signal, which can be tracked. Again, while this is a smart idea, why didn't she just do it with Dani's phone? Consistency. Please understand the meaning. As the movie continues, we get several flashbacks of Grace in the future. We see the Resistance fighting multiple primal-looking Terminators, as well as seeing Grace in surgery for the augmentation program. There's quite a bit to unpack here, so let's start with the future war setting. First, the color tone looks more like Salvation's future war aesthetic. Personally, I prefer the aesthetic of James Cameron's future war, and this includes the plasma weapons and gritty feel. This future, however, looks cheap. Now, while I wasn't the biggest fan of the Mad Max style Salvation was going for, it at least looked more gritty and less polished than Dark Fate. Another issue is the state of the Resistance, and specifically their outfits. This Resistance looks too clean and modern. Their outfits look too pristine as well. The Resistance we're introduced to in the first two films was shown to be more like a fragmented militia barely surviving. Each time we see them, they were dirty and worn out. The first film heavily emphasized that this Resistance was on the edge. They were not as well equipped as their enemy, and they had to resort to guerrilla tactics to succeed. It really put in your mind that this isn't a well-organized and flourishing group. Yet despite their dire situation, they still fought to protect what little they had. I did not get this same impression from this series of flashbacks. And while you could argue that this is to give us a different version of the Resistance that we knew, one that was more well-prepared, put together, and capable of fighting against this new Skynet, the very narrative contradicts this. If the Resistance is meant to be better equipped, why are they in a similar desperate situation with hiding the ashes of the old world? Where's the superior organization? If this new Resistance is supposedly in a better position, why not send a reprogrammed Terminator instead of a drug-dependent super soldier that could crash in mere minutes? If this is the filmmaker's attempt at creating tension and high stakes, it was done much better and much more simply in the first film. This extra narrative weight is only slugging the plot and pace. When Grace wakes up, she sees Sarah pointing a gun at her, and Sarah starts demanding answers. Grace then gets up with her super cartoony speed and pins Sarah against the wall. Nice job there, Grace, pinning an old woman against the wall with such force. What follows is an exposition dump from Sarah about Skynet and stopping Judgment Day. We get a bit of an emotional scene where Sarah's asked what happened to John, and she explains what she's been doing since his death. Accompanying this is the song that played in T2 during the desert scene. Ever since The Force Awakens came out, I've slowly been getting upset with nostalgia references like this. It's the key jangling member-berry junk that's only used to manipulate the audience into ignoring the glaring issues with the story. Something that caught my attention in this dialogue is that Sarah said Skynet sent many Terminators back in time, and eventually one caught up with John. Since John's death, Sarah said she's been hunting Terminators. But how are there more Terminators? How are they showing up? Where are they showing up from? And are they Skynet Terminators or Legion Terminators? This doesn't get answered. So within the 22-year time span, Sarah's just been running around killing Terminators?
What are you, a glutton for punishment?
After Sarah and Grace have a little back and forth dialogue, they're on the road again, and we get more exposition about what exactly is happening in this new timeline. And a quick side note, I really don't like how Grace is talking to Sarah. She gets aggressive and threatens Sarah with physical violence if she gets in her way. For those of you who like this movie because of Sarah, I hope you enjoy this new character with a huge flaw dissing the woman we've waited years to see again. This treatment of Sarah elicits angry feelings and memories I have of the treatment dealt towards legacy characters with Star Wars. We waited years for these fan favorites to return, only to have them get disrespected by these new characters who are terrible by comparison. Unfortunately, this isn't the last of the insults this film throws Sarah's way. We will get back to this point, but I feel the need to speak up for Sarah Connor here. After T2, the lack of respect for Sarah Connor upset many fans, including myself. Whether it was her unceremonious death in T3, the Sarah Connor Chronicles not fleshing out her character better, or Genesis's recasting and bastardization of her love story with Kyle Reese, we are in a desperate need for the original Linda Hamilton Sarah Connor to return. Seeing her in the trailer was nice at first, but we already know what this means. Hollywood doesn't have a good track record when it comes to bringing back original characters. And of course, as we've seen so far, it's been subpar to insulting. Here we have a legendary character that we've waited years to see again, and what's been presented is a bored-sounding line delivery with an average introduction from a car, followed by an androgynous thing threatening her with physical violence despite the fact that she just saved her life a few minutes ago. I mean, when I said that Sarah didn't get much character development here, I should have rephrased it. What I should have said is that her character gets ran into the ground and becomes as important and useful as Chewbacca in the sequel trilogy. Take Sarah Connor out of Dark Fate, and it wouldn't change the movie very much. And that's a bad sign of your character's purpose and relevance to the plot. And the same could be said for the T-800. Regardless, none of this should be happening to her. Her character arc from the first film to Judgment Day was pivotal to the overall story. She goes from timid and afraid to mama bear badass. Her relationship with John was a huge aspect of her character, and Dark Fate ripped that away from her. Instead, we get this unconvincing carbon copy with none of the emotional and historical importance or investment. Watching washed-up Sarah Connor in this movie is like seeing Arnold reprise his role as the T-800 over and over, with each return ruining the character.
You named it?
Hello, Calories. It is nice to meet you.
You whore.
Are you kidding me?
No, I am not shitting you.
And if this is the last we see of Sarah Connor played by Linda Hamilton, it's going to be as bitter as seeing Carrie Fisher in The Last Jedi. Linda Hamilton and Sarah Connor deserve better. Anyways, it seems that the filmmakers have opted for going with T3's line of thinking and that Judgment Day is inevitable. While Sarah and John's actions prevented the Judgment Day we know, it spawned a whole other Judgment Day. According to Grace, a computer system called Legion was created for cyber warfare. It became self-aware and attacked everybody. Sarah says a line about people never learning, which I can't help but think of as a fourth wall breaking reference to the fact that this is the third T2 Judgment Day clone we've received in this franchise. And if this exposition dump here feels at all familiar and excessively repetitive, you're not the only one. When people say that this movie is just a rehash of T2, this is one of the major reasons why. In fact, I'd say it's a rehash of the entire franchise. Think about it. With the dialogue we've been given, the new Terminator, and this augmented human, the filmmakers are trying to convince us that this is a completely different future. Yet, contrary to the info we have, it's not very different at all. If you want an example of an unnecessary and unoriginal film, this is it. Instead of setting this movie in the future war and giving us new insight into the nightmare that's been teased to us for years, they give us the same story with a new coat of paint that comes off as generic, uninspired, and lazy. My question is, why go through this trouble of rebooting the franchise if you're just going to do the same thing all over again? There is literally no difference between Legion and Skynet, and we later find out that the T-800 that killed John had nothing to do with Legion's rise, effectively making his presence and relevance to this story meaningless. First and foremost, you must remember that Terminator Dark Fate is a sequel to T2 Judgment Day. A sequel! Which means that the story from the first two films is still going on. The idea of Legion becoming self-aware and causing another Judgment Day is not the inherent problem here per se. It's the fact that the filmmakers made the unnecessary choice of giving us a new Terminator plot that essentially functions the exact same as the previous one. Even Legion's original purpose, that being a program used for war before becoming self-aware, is a direct clone of Skynet's rise. What I find most baffling is that this new T-800 had nothing to do with it. If the movie explained that because that T-800 lived on past killing John and manipulated its way into making sure Skynet was created, then having a third Judgment Day would at least make sense from a continuity standpoint, but that's not what's happening here. It's an all too familiar situation to the existence of the First Order in the sequel trilogy. Bring back a familiar formula, but with a different coat of paint, and market it as a brand new story that follows the same general beats as its predecessor, but with a few twists and turns to give the illusion of difference. You could easily convince someone that this film is a remake of the Terminator franchise, considering what its very existence overwrites. We will come back to this point when we get reintroduced to the new T-800, But for now, we're going to end it here. Make sure to stay tuned next time as we continue on with the story, and just to clarify things here, this series will be breaking down the entire film. If you're looking for a short, simple review, then I recommend finding one of the many reviews that are on YouTube. One of the things I enjoy about watching movies is being able to understand some of the deeper meanings behind the story. And if I come across a bad movie in a franchise I like, I feel the need to understand why I don't like it. With Dark Fate, it's really easy to understand. But for the sake of explaining my views on the film to those of you who don't know me personally, this series was created to be that bridge. I've learned over the years that it's never a good idea to blindly consume a product just because it's in a familiar package. If the several Star Wars movies or Marvel products are any examples to go by, it's highly suggested to re-evaluate what passes as quality entertainment these days, as I'd say the waters have become a little polluted as of late. Regardless though, I hope you are enjoying the ride so far. This is the first big project I've engaged in with this format, and while I'm sure there are plenty of things to improve on, the learning experience is well worth pondering for the sake of future endeavors. With that being said, I want to thank J-Man from Backtrack Cinema for partaking in this series and giving his thoughts on the film. And also, a special thank you to our Patreon supporters, Mother Moeller and Kyle Curtis Flett. We appreciate your continued support. So, with that all being said, thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, remember that the entertainment is out there.
Skynet was gone. Now one road has become many. Though questions remain, we'll search for the answers together. But one thing we know for sure: the future is not set.
I'll be back.